Right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me properly. I think with microphones should be very easy. I'm quite used to speaking without microphones to large audiences, so if I'm too loud, I'll just step back, I suppose. So my name is Groen, and as of 2 weeks, I'm a lecturer in computer science at Brunel University, London. And before that, I was a research fellow in the Center for Computational Science in the chemistry department at University College London, and before that I did a PhD in computational astrophysics in Leiden, so I've sailed a bit along different disciplines really. So my wife will be presenting after me. We have a 7-month-old daughter, and I really didn't think it would be just to go by myself, so we went together and we will be speaking together. But I'll do the first part of my slides. Which is about scholarly publishing perspective from an early career academic. I guess I'm still an early career academic, but a lot of my experience actually does not so much only come from my own research background, but also from being in the panels for recruiting postdocs. I was in the rather unique position that I was in a research group where there were 17 postdocs, no lecturers, no associate professors, no assistant professors, just one professor, sort of pulling all the strings on all the different postdocs. And I think in the past 4 years, I've been in the panels of about 15 to 20 postdoc positions, and each panel had about 5 candidates. So you end up doing about 100 interviews and shortlisting people who freshly got out of their PhDs. And I thought some of the experiences there would be particularly interesting to share here. So, of course, I mean, research evaluation is crucial in academic recruitment, and particularly when somebody's fresh out of their PhD, that's a major, the primary factor that you're going to judge them on. But there's one issue actually in that area, and that is that a lot of fresh PhDs have published only very few papers. And also, it's very difficult, as also alluded to before, it's very difficult to determine sort of the roles that they have played in sort of writing these papers. And so I think this is one of the main points that I want to bring across, that actually the publication is an incredibly awkward unit of research. I mean, it's pretty effective at sort of conveying prestige when you're at the professorial level, but when you come fresh out of your PhD, especially with the differences in the types and the lengths of PhDs you have in different countries, it actually becomes quite uneasy, quite difficult to figure out how much progress has actually been made by that researcher. I mean, some PhD students work on 1 paper during the PhDs. I know students who have written 0 papers during their PhD even, and others work on 5 or even more papers. And then just to sort of show 2 of my publications, I mean, some papers are 3 pages, like the one on the left, and it has 20 authors. And then other papers are 60 pages. That's in advanced materials, like 20 pages and then 60 pages extra supplementary material, and they have 2 or 3 authors. And the contribution that people do to such a paper, even though both of them are in high-impact journals, is completely different. And particularly on the left, it is very difficult to figure out who did what. And this, again, was mentioned a little bit early in the morning, but I think I have a slightly different angle on that, because the thing is that the publication unit in general is very, very large when you place it in the context of early career academia. So the way I look at peer reviewing, having published a few dozen papers or so, is usually that you have 2 reviewers who look at it and they're pretty good, and then one of the 3 tends to be a bit more random. That can be because of the background or just the way the reviewers are assigned, but more or less it tends to be you have 2 sensible reviews, and then there's a bit of a toss of a coin, and that sort of determines whether your publication goes through or not. And if you have a lot of publications, this is not a huge problem, because, you know, over the large numbers, it will sort of average out. But if you only have 1 or 2 publications, this is absolutely crucial. It's the difference between published and not published, 0 or 1 publications. And if it happens to be your only high-impact publication on your CV, then it can mean, oh, I get my PhD, or I get my postdoc job, or I don't, and I actually stream out of academia. I think that is incredibly harsh, unfair, and it's actually oversimplified. And of course, you can read every single article, but very often these people have to be shortlisted. You don't, for a postdoc position, you don't have 5 applicants. You tend to have 20, 30, 40, 50 applicants. So you can't interview all of them. You have to make a selection somewhere. And in that pre-selection, you can't afford to completely scan out all the CVs and read all the papers that people wrote. So this is a very big problem in early career recruitment, at least in my personal experience. And I've been trying to think of ways like, okay, so how can you sort of resolve that? And the thing with role attribution is that role attribution has a lot of benefits. You're able to sort of quantify who did what, or at least that people can indicate that. But very often there's also a bit of a hierarchy in a publication. There's sort of a PI who sort of leads the publication and decides how contributions are sort of panned out. And it also adds a lot of complexity. Another solution could be to just assign more reviewers, do a more thorough peer review. But I think that's a very costly effort, also from the publisher's perspective, but also from the researcher's perspective, because the amount of peer review that everybody ends up doing just becomes more and more. So what I argue for is actually to promote a much wider range of smaller research products, like datasets, software, interpretations, technical documents, experience reports, things that people have are subsets of the overall publication as it is today, but that actually have merit and value and integrity in their own right. I think it is beneficial because the unit of publication becomes smaller. It becomes much more clear who does what, because some people may write the code, some people might generate the data, other people do the interpretation, and it's much easier to sort of isolate those individual parts. But also, as the science progresses, I think it's also a lot easier to sort of say, okay, this particular unit of research has become obsolete or has been disproven or superseded by something else. Today, it happens every now and then that a paper gets retracted, but a publication has a lot of different facets and a lot of different elements. And just because one part of it is wrong doesn't necessarily mean that the whole paper is worthless. I also think that many of these smaller research projects actually do exist in the publishing world. For example, software papers are on the rise, at least in my community. But I think it only becomes truly helpful once also the universities start to take them into account when they sort of assess them in their job review, PhD review processes, and also in their incentive systems as people climb up in the academic ladder. So this is a bit of a different one, but this was another thought that I had that could be relevant. And I thought another thing that sort of came to me was that when you publish, you cite papers, and these papers sometimes change in status. Sometimes you use a version of the software, and there's a newer version of the software which is more accurate. Sometimes you have a data set from a telescope, but actually a new telescope has gone up in the air, and actually it finds a bit, slightly different measurements. For example, I once did cosmological simulations using data from the WMAP project, but then the Planck satellite goes into the air and it gives newer, more accurate data. So one thing I was thinking about is to see whether papers are becoming a little bit obsolete or whether they're still very cutting edge. One could consider doing annotated reference lists, where in addition to just having the reference, you can sort of with a sort of traffic light symbol indicate whether a paper is up to date or whether authors have already indicated like, well, actually, it has been superseded by a new version from us, or the paper has been amended because there was an inaccuracy in the paper, or perhaps there were other authors who said, oh, this paper has been disproven. In very rare cases, a paper may have been retracted, and it's also incredibly useful to know when a paper relies on retracted literature. And I thought a system like this could help to resolve that, because in my current daily work as a researcher, if I read a paper, I really can't see whether a reference is valid or not. I have no way to tell that. And I would actually have to go down all the references to try and figure that out. Okay, so that's all I have. I thank you for your time.